Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe, Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock with you. The normal disclaimer, 5:55 on a Wednesday is when we're recording this in the middle of a coaching search. Quiet day to this point, and I shouldn't have said that out loud, but to this point, with Mike McDaniel having backed out of his interview, he took the Chargers offensive coordinator job. We talked a lot about that on the pod right before this one, so go check that out. We also talked a lot about the Baker Mayfield Kevin Stefanski thing as well on that pod. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to that or watch that, go check that out on our feeds. Mary Kay, again, a quiet day today, but this thing's going to pick up steam here over the next few days. Where are we at right now with this interview schedule moving forward?
Well, the thing that did happen today that has a ripple effect on the Cleveland Browns is the fact that Tommy flew down to Atlanta. He arrived there in Atlanta, and he is going to be taking that OC job with Kevin Stefanski in Atlanta. So I've been writing that for a couple of weeks. Even before Kevin got the job, I told everyone that Tommy was going to be going with him wherever he went. And lo and behold, that is happening now. And that means that no matter what happens here, the Browns for sure need to find a new offensive coordinator, unless, of course, they set it up a little bit differently. If they hire an offensive head coach who's going to maybe call the plays, who knows how they structure the offensive side of the ball. I'm sure they probably will end up having an offensive coordinator, but now they definitely have a vacancy for that. And it must be remembered that they have to Rooney Rule those coordinator positions as well. So we need to remember that they also need to interview a minority or woman. I think it's also 2 for their coordinator jobs.
Yeah, I think it's 2 for coordinators, and then it's also 1 for quarterbacks coach.
Right.
One if they decided to hire a quarterbacks coach.
But right. I believe the difference is the Rooney Rule for coordinators, it can be virtual. That's the big difference.
Yep.
That is correct. So those can be virtual. But right now, just in case anybody doesn't quite realize this, the Browns are in a position, and I've gotten clarification from the NFL on this, that they definitely do still have to interview 2 minority candidates, minority and or woman. They have to do that. It's not like somebody was asking me today, well, if they just go ahead and hire Nate on Monday, doesn't that count? Do they still have to? No, you have to interview 2. You have to interview 2. So they still have to do that. And we've talked about the fact that now it might be a little awkward because Mike McDaniel was their second minority candidate. Nate Scheelhaase is the other. They're talking to him on Monday. And now they have to call up another minority or female candidate and interview them when they're not on the current list or weren't on the. I don't know how they're going to get around that. I don't know what they're doing about that. But that's something that has to happen before they can make their hire. But so anyways, Tommy going to Atlanta. We know that Chad O'Shea is already gone. I'm guessing that maybe more of the offensive coaches are also going to go. Someone had mentioned to me that maybe Deuce Staley was also going to end up in Kansas City. I haven't seen that happened yet. But as far as the Browns search is concerned, where it's at right now is today they had an open day. They had an open day because Mike McDaniel was supposed to be in today. And maybe that is going to prove to be a blessing in disguise for them in some way. Maybe they had time to process their second interviews with Jim Schwartz, which happened on Monday, and with Todd Monken, which happened on Tuesday. Maybe they had a chance to catch their breath before they head into the second round of their second interviews, which consists of Chargers defensive coordinator Jesse Minter on Thursday, Jaguars offensive coordinator Grant Udinski on Friday, and then Scheelhaase on Monday. And we don't know where the Rooney candidate is going to come in. But I still think that it could be any one of these guys. I don't think we know yet. I mean, if I had to rank who I think would be still in the hunt the most or whatever, I still sort of think that Jesse Minter doesn't really track in terms of what's going on with their own defense and running a different kind of defense. That one to me still sort of seems like, I'm not sure if that would be the right necessarily the right fit for him or for the Cleveland Browns. And he's got plenty of other opportunities. He's going to get a head coaching job. Maybe the Ravens. I don't know. He's going to get a good job. But I don't know if it's going to be here. But I don't think we can rule any of these guys out at this moment.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same place. It's just so hard to get a feel for this. And I think, I guess if I know everybody puts out those betting odds all the time, and I don't actually believe any of those when I see those. I think those are just marketing scams. But anyway, I know Grant Udinski has been near the top of the list the last few days. And obviously, it's kind of funny, Ashley. It feels like Grant Udinski has gotten all this buzz. And sort of as that's happened, Nathan Scheelhaase sort of hasn't been getting as much buzz. Udinski has kind of been the guy that Browns fans have latched onto. But it is Scheelhaase that they're certainly willing to wait on to talk to him until Monday. They wouldn't be able to hire him if the Rams win on Sunday. They wouldn't be able to hire him until after the Super Bowl. But I do think it's interesting that he's still sort of that guy that they're willing to wait on to talk to. It just makes me wonder if maybe internally, do they have him ranked a little higher than a Grant Udinski? And then, of course, we don't know how they feel about all these veteran guys either.
No, I mean, we really don't. And look, I think with Scheelhaase, it's interesting because he obviously hasn't been a coordinator at the NFL level. And being a coordinator in college is just different. Like, I think of a guy like Mike McDaniel, he went back and forth, right? Like he started in Baltimore and he was a position coach, and then he went and became a coordinator in college at Michigan, and then he came back and was a coordinator with the Ravens before he got hired. Like you see those paths a lot, but there aren't a ton of people like Scheelhaase, who was in college for this long time, served as a coordinator there, and then is in the NFL now, but not in a coordinator role, not in terms of like running a traditional position room right now. He's the pass game coordinator. So it's a bit different, but he's obviously learning from Sean McVay, which everyone is trying to mine a bit of that McVay magic, whatever you want to call it, that sort of innovation that really has worked for the Rams over however many years Sean McVay has been there right now. So that is, I think, an interesting part of all of this. And it's like, do they know which way they want to go? I mean, I said this yesterday, like, I do find it interesting that there were multiple of these younger, offensive-minded options. And like, I include Mike McDaniel in that, obviously no longer an option, but him, Scheelhaase, Udinski, all these guys who I think from the outside looking in, you think about that offensive innovation they could bring. And it's really, really interesting because, it's like there's no through line with all of these candidates, though. And that's why I think it's so hard to guess what they're thinking.
Yeah, and the more you look at the two young candidates specifically, Mary Kay, and obviously, look, the young candidates are always going to get everybody excited. And we talk about trying to find that next Sean McVay. And with both of these guys, you can make the case that they've got very thin resumes, even compared. I mean, like Sean McVay, for as much as we talk about, well, look how young he was when he got hired. He was the OC in Washington for 3 years before he took that job. He was the tight ends coach for 3 years before that. So we're talking about a guy who was running a position room and then running an offense for 6 years before he became a head coach. Grant Udinski, I kind of dug into him a little bit for my Tuesday column, and I kind of came away from it feeling like I was stretching a little bit to kind of find he worked for Kevin O'Connell, and that's good, and he got some experience learning what a head coach does. And then he worked for Liam Cohen, who worked for Sean McVay, and I think that's good because I think Liam Cohen might be one of those guys, but we don't know that yet. And then Scheelhaase, to what Ashley was talking about, he's not been a coordinator at the NFL level, but he has run position rooms at the college level. And of course, now he's a pass game coordinator at the NFL level. So these resumes are very thin. These are big gambles on both of these guys because, again, even when you compare it to Sean McVay, who got hired right before his 31st birthday, Sean McVay had a lot more experience than either of these guys had.
Right. What they will have to do if they hire one of these young guys, they're going to have to then have a really strong support system around them. Now, let's say, for instance, that they hire Grant. if they can then keep Jim Schwartz on the defensive side of the ball, they're good to go on that side of the ball. They don't have to worry about it at all. On the offensive side of the ball, they will need to rebuild the entire staff, and Grant would need to have maybe an experienced play caller. Maybe he becomes the play caller. He would have to have a wise old sage, a senior offensive advisor, or an older, more experienced offensive coordinator. Now, we know that Todd Monken, who is in line to get the head coaching job here, he has an opportunity to go with John Harbaugh to New York. But who knows? Maybe the Browns try to keep him here as offensive coordinator too. So, he's not out of it yet. So there are some guys in that category that you can hire and bring along and pair them with one of these young guys and see how that's all going to work out for you. And some of it's going to be a gamble, and some of it's going to just have to be the fact that you're going to go with this gut feeling and think that you have the right leader for your organization. And that is what you really need. And that's what we heard that Kevin always was, the right leader for the organization. And sometimes it's that until it's just not. And so it's hard. It's hard to get it right. But if they do go with one of the young guys, you can rest assured that there will be those Bill Callahans on the staff, or a Jim Schwartz still as defensive coordinator, or somebody else as offensive coordinator who's done it for a good long time. Or maybe Bill Musgrave sticks around as quarterbacks coach, or maybe even offensive coordinator. Who knows? I mean, he's been plenty of those things before. So there are so many different ways that you can go about this, but they're not going to leave those two young guys hanging out to dry if they hire them a little prematurely for their first head coaching gig.
Right. And I think that's the most important part is, and Grant talked about this in that interview he did with Ari Mirov. Mike Pettin has randomly, there was a clip, Mike Pettin went on a show and he was talking about this as well when, he first became a head coach, is that one of the things you find out is when you become a head coach, you don't really coach as much as you want. You're doing a lot of other stuff. And especially in this organization, like this is not an organization that like silos. Like there are a million things that are going to come across your desk all of a sudden if you're Grant Udinski or you're Nate Scheelhaase that you had no idea you were going to have to deal with. And so it's one of the things Kevin understood really well, Ashley. And look, Kevin had a ton of experience too, even though he'd only been a coordinator for a year before he took the Browns job. It's one of the things he understood well, which is why he brought in Bill Callahan and Kevin Rogers and Alex Van Pelt and all of these people who could help him kind of navigate some of this stuff in his first head coaching experience. And that's the challenge. And that's the thing we don't know about these guys is, are they ready to handle the stuff that isn't just being a brilliant offensive mind and just coaching guys? Because again, like Mike Pettin said in that one interview I saw today, once you become a head coach, you actually kind of do less coaching all of a sudden.
Yeah, I always think about how Kevin, when he first got here, his first few years here, would always talk about, well, Bill Callahan's office is right next to mine, right? Like that was such a point of pride for him. And he would ask Bill about anything he needed to. And look, he obviously has more experience now, but Bill Callahan was one of the first hires he made after he got hired in Atlanta for a reason. So I do think those sort of things are very important. And it's also why I think, too, we've talked about if they do go with not one of these young guys and like they hire Jim Schwartz or even like a Todd Monken, there is still a possibility of that sort of flipping, right? And if it's a more veteran head coach, having that younger, innovative offensive mind. Like, I mean, Scheelhaase, I've wondered since his name came up, like, oh, is this a guy who maybe they think they like him? Maybe they'll come away thinking, oh, we don't know if he's ready to be a head coach yet. We don't want to take that jump. But maybe he's the prime kind of guy that you'd look at, they bring him in for that, and he ends up as your offensive coordinator. I mean, we've seen them do that before. And I'm curious if it'll go that way too. But I think either way, it's that situation is going to be flip-flops. Either young head coach, really senior coordinators, or more veteran head coach, possibly younger offensive guy who's a bit more unproven in that OC role.
Yeah, and just to kind of flip this on its head a little bit too, Mary Kay, because I don't want to come across as the like don't hire the young guys guy. I am actually intrigued by both of these guys, but just because Jim Schwartz and Todd Monken or whoever else might have more experience, it doesn't mean that they're the right choice just because they have that experience too. And that's what Andrew Berry and the Haslams have to sort of balance here is, do they trust one of these young guys enough that they can be this team's, whether it's Sean McVay, whatever it is, can they be this team's coach for the next 10 years and win at the level they want them to win at? And if they believe that, that's fine. Like, they shouldn't just hire a Jim Schwartz or a Todd Monken just because they're experienced. They've got to hire the right candidate regardless of age or experience.
Right, because teams have taken chances in the past on young guys or inexperienced guys or guys that came from special teams, and they have hit it out of the park. And I'm talking about like a Mike Tomlin or a John Harbaugh, again, a Sean McVay, young. So you really just have to find the right combination. And once you get your guy, then you have to make sure that you supply him with a quarterback. That's probably, that is the most important thing that you have to do. And we know that the Browns have said that that's their number one priority. Now, they can say that all they want, but I don't see a whole bunch of options for them out there, either in the draft or free agency or in the trade market or on their roster. I don't see a whole bunch of guys where you could say, yes, I see the vision here with this quarterback, and he is going to absolutely come in here and win games for you this season. Maybe it'll be Shedeur. Maybe with a really good supporting cast, he can do that. Maybe Deshaun will stay healthy and he can do that. But right now, I just don't necessarily see a great quarterback landscape. But you can take a chance on a young guy, an inexperienced guy, and it can work, once again, as long as you have a quarter. You have a defense. You have that already. You have to have the quarterback. Or you're hanging your young guy or your old guy or your medium guy out to dry. You cannot do that to that person. And I need to back up on something real quick. I want to revisit the Mike Pettin doesn't have too much time to coach. In 2014, he had Justin Gilbert, Josh Gordon, Johnny Manziel, and others. I used to call those guys the juvenile Jays. And it was one thing after another. Absolutely one thing after another. So when you're putting out those kinds of fires, you don't have as much time to coach as you want to, because you are spending 95% of your time on guys like that.
Yeah, that was obviously, everybody knows the Johnny Manziel stories and all of that. But I remember after that 2014 season, Justin Gilbert telling us like he couldn't even wake up when his alarm went off. Like, he admitted that in a press conference. Like, it was tough. That was a baptism by fire for Mike Pettin, and he had a really strong staff too. And that's now they were all young for the most part, but he had a really strong staff. So I don't remember how old he was when especially that 2014 team.
It was an amazing.
So he was 48 when he took the job. So he was a little bit older, and he of course had been a DC for a little while too, and had worked in Baltimore and with the Jets. But that's another part of this is you've got to make sure it's not just make sure you bring in coaches around him, but make sure you're putting your coach in a position roster wise where you can kind of ease him in a little bit, and you're bringing in the right people culture wise that he's going to be able to work with and deal with, and you're not putting him in a position where he has to put out where they've got to send somebody to find Johnny Manziel and Josh Gordon the last day of the season because they didn't show up at the facility for a Saturday walkthrough. So it's a holistic approach. And I also think, Ashley, the big thing about this is if you do hire a young guy, you've got to acknowledge there's going to be some growing pains. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to go 3-14 or 5-12, but there's going to be growing pains, and there's probably going to be some games that you might lose because of that, especially if you have a really young offense. So I think the Browns have to brace themselves a little bit for that as well. Once again, that doesn't mean 3-14 or tanking or anything, but there might be some rocky moments over the course of a 17-game season.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing though is it seems like Jimmy Haslam knew there were going to be some rocky moments in 2025. Like he acknowledged before the season even started that there wasn't an answer at quarterback, and that didn't affect the end result. Like people, Kevin Stefanski, still lost their jobs. And to that point of that holistic approach, and obviously with the Tommy Rees news that we talked about up top, mentioned Kevin hiring Bill Callahan, like it's going to be really interesting this next year or two to look at what happens with them down in Atlanta and Kevin essentially running it back with the coaching staff or like key chunks of his coaching staff down there, because it's going to tell a lot potentially about the personnel and roster construction here. And it might be some stuff that we already know, but I'll be really curious to kind of see how these two franchises, they're now sort of linked for me in that way. And I think we're going to get some answers on both sides.
Yeah, let's just talk about that real quick, just a little more, Mary Kay. The idea of Kevin kind of getting the band back together in a lot of ways down in Atlanta seems to be a little bit of an acknowledgement that maybe it was, he doesn't believe, and you would expect this, obviously, that he doesn't believe it was all coaching here in Cleveland. But do you think it'll work for Kevin? I will tell you this, our texters were not sad to see Tommy Rees go. And I understand that because the offense has been really bad for 2 years, but we've talked about it on this pod. I don't think it was all the coaching staff's fault. Do you think this will work in Atlanta?
Who's his quarterback?
That's true.
Who's Kevin Stefanski's quarterback? It all comes back to that for me all the time. Who is the quarterback? And if it's not Kirk Cousins, and Kirk has a big situation coming up this offseason where he might not even end up being there. And Michael Penix is coming off of an injury. So they've got to figure out exactly what they're doing at quarterback if they want Kevin to be successful in his first season there. And he has to make sure that he has a comfort level with what's going on. Now, of course, they want to be committed to Michael Penix. He was their number 8 overall pick. So they want to bring out the best in him, maximize his ability, and make him work. And hopefully for them, they can do that. But, sometimes these guys aren't even 100% ready by the start of the season. And if they're not, you're going to get off to a rocky season. How many times have we seen Kevin Stefanski go into a season without having had his offense practicing together in training camp very much at all? That's happened a number of times. So if he doesn't have that, then I think they're going to struggle. He's got to have the quarterback, and then that quarterback has got to have really good weapons around him. And I cannot overstate that, how important that is. You've got to have 3-4 guys on that roster that can go out there and make magic happen by catching the ball, making spectacular catches like the ones that we have seen in these playoffs. Just amazing catches. So if he has that, then I think he'll be fine. And if the new coach in Cleveland has that, I think he'll be fine. But those are the priorities for really, in my mind, any football team.
Well, the good news for Kevin is he's in familiar territory. Atlanta traded their first round pick to the Rams last year, so he doesn't even have that. The Rams might win the Super Bowl and they might end up with like the 12th pick in the draft. But so he's kind of used to that. But I will say, if Bill Callahan can figure out that O-line, he's going to have a pretty good running back, which we saw he was pretty good with when Nick Chubb was here and when Kareem Hunt was here. Pretty good receiver in Drake London. I don't know what they're going to do with Kyle Pitts. There are some weapons there. There are some pieces there. But Ashley, like we always talk about, like Mary Kay always says, if Kirk Cousins is the quarterback and he can't move and he's just too old, that's not going to be good for Kevin. If Michael Penix isn't going to be able to practice or even be on the field until September or something, or August or September, that's not going to be great. So yeah, it kind of comes down to, does he have a guy that maybe he'll bring Joe Flacco to Atlanta? Just have Kirk Cousins, Joe Flacco, and Michael Penix in that room.
Yeah, that's what's interesting is like Atlanta is also one of those teams where the quarterback situation is not really resolved. And, like, that's to me is why it is interesting that Kevin took that job. I mean, there's a lot of factors, right? But Kevin was very highly sought after this coaching cycle. I mean, he was the most sought after person before John Harbaugh got fired. And then after it became obvious John Harbaugh was going to the Giants. So, like, I still think there's a world in which he could have had his choice. And like, maybe he did. Maybe he just really liked all of these things that we're talking about. And, the deal was right and all of that. But it is just interesting to me that he went to a place where there isn't like the same kind of questions that there are here, but they hardly have an answer yet, like a for sure answer. And we hear all of these coaches as they go through this process talk about knowing the quarterback situation is the most important thing when you are interviewing for these jobs. And I think especially when you are a highly sought after candidate. So like all this stuff is still to be determined. I just think it's a really interesting connection between these franchises now. And it's going to be this, I don't know, this very interesting process, I think, to watch play out over the next 1 to 2 years between these two teams.
Okay, there we go. Reset of the coaching search as it kind of gets back underway. A little Kevin Stefanski talk. Maybe Kevin just liked his Thursday nights of the draft. I know we kind of got used to those Thursday nights where there wasn't a first round pick and it was kind of like, oh, this is nice. We're just sitting here watching the draft. Maybe Kevin looked in and was like, I'm going to go someplace that doesn't have a first round pick. I really enjoyed that. So maybe that was his thinking. Who knows? We will wrap things up there. Find the Orange and Brown Talk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Find us on YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. And if you're not a Football Insider subscriber, get subscribed, cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page. For Mary Kay and Ashley, I'm Dan. Thanks for listening, everybody.